Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Keep Tobacco Sacred Day webinar. We are so honored to have you all joining us today for this inaugural event. We're going to get started, and we have an exciting day with all of you today for the next hour. So, with that, I just want to say hello. Hayaka washde, hafade, chazemitawa, inisahumaki makiapi, tobacco wakba inwati. Hello, everyone. My name is Coco Villaluz, and I'm the Deputy Director at the American Indian Cancer Foundation. And today we're excited to bring to you two speakers that we'll be highlighting here shortly to talk about traditional tobacco and understanding what Keep Tobacco Sacred Day is all about. So at the American Indian Cancer Foundation, we are a national nonprofit established to address the tremendous cancer inequity faced by American Indians and Alaska Natives. Our mission is to eliminate the cancer burdens on American Indian families through education and improved access to prevention, early detection, treatment, and survivor support. And today, you guys are all here to learn about traditional tobacco, and we're really wanting to shift the narrative of why our world will never be tobacco free. For many American Indians, tobacco is one of our most sacred medicines. In our community, we use chanshasha. It's a gift for prayers, offerings for the Creator. And Lori and Suzanne are going to get into some of these amazing stories and uses. And often we hear, no tobacco or tobacco free. And we really want people to understand that that's not always the case. And really sharing the beauty, the medicine, and the gift that tobacco is. We have written a paper in the past with an amazing group of people, community members, who tobacco is their first medicine. And you could see the article here. And so that's why we like to say our world will never be tobacco free. And that's why we're shifting from World No Tobacco Day for our organization to Keep Tobacco Sacred Day. So with that, I'm so excited to just jump in. We can hear these two ladies for hours tell stories, but we really wanted to just give a little bit of background. We're so honored and fortunate to have Lori Newbreast and Suzanne Nash with us. Lori Newbreast lives on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation in Montana and is a member of the Amskapi Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy in Canada and US. Lori is dedicated to the principles of cooperation and collaboration to ensure individual and community self-determined optimum well-being. Lori has engaged collaboratively with tribal, indigenous, multicultural, rural, and urban communities, federal, national, state, county, private, and public foundations, as well as international entities on tobacco. Lori continues to work with diverse governance professionals and community groups to plan, develop policy, and wellness strategies to strengthen protocols and practices for American Indian, Alaska Native, and Indigenous individuals and communities. Lori has specific expertise as a facilitator and trainer in policy and advocacy, planning, program operations, and implementation for tribal governments, indigenous communities, policy and organizational technical assistance, youth programming prevention services, community wellness, and health promotion training and workshops. Lori also does creative expression workshops and tailored professional personnel services, as well as mentorship programs. She serves as a tribal and national trainer in community training on intergenerational community healing and empowerment, culturally based leadership principles, organization wellness, coalition, and team building. Lori does so many amazing things and is committed to self-determination and cultural expression and the creation of viable practices to support Indigenous people's well-being. I think that's just a snapshot. I've been fortunate to work with Lori for many years, and I think that's just a tiny bit. So I'm excited for you all to tune in to what Lori has to say. And then our next speaker is Suzanne Nash, who's an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Reservation in Minnesota. Suzanne work exemplifies a deep commitment to Indigenous communities and well-being, blending traditional practices with contemporary solutions to address pressing issues like substance use, health disparities, and cultural preservation. As a Return to First Medicines project coordinator, Suzanne has spearheaded vital initiatives that combine advocacy, education, and community healing. Her leadership in organizing the Return to First Medicines conference for over 19 years speaks to her dedication to returning to traditional knowledge with the focus on revitalizing Indigenous practices, particularly in the realm of medicine and wellness. Her creative vision was also behind the National Indigenous Youth Fashion Show in Washington, D.C., which showcased the rich Indigenous culture through fashion, fostering pride and solidarity among youth. Suzanne's advocacy work spans a range of critical issues. She actively engages in policy and advocacy spheres, serving as a board member on the Minnesota Governor's Advisory Council on Opioids, Substance Use, and Addiction. Her focus on community health extends to her work in youth programs, where she addresses substance abuse prevention, promotes the restoration of traditional tobacco use, and educates through art and theater. She's also a passionate advocate for holistic health and prevention, founding the IndigiBaby Baby Food Project to combat diabetes in Indigenous communities, using traditional foods as a tool for healing. Her work at the Indigenous Peoples Task Force and her founding of the Remember Our Loved Ones Memorial underscore her commitment to honoring those lost to addiction and providing a space for healing for families affected by substance use. So as you can see, these two ladies have an incredible background. I've been so fortunate, like I said, to know both of them for 20 years. And this is just really a little tidbit into their incredible lives and the stories and their commitment. And when we were planning this Keep Tobacco Sacred Day webinar, they were the first to come to mind because they live and breathe and practice our cultural ways. They grow tobacco, they know tobacco, and in our line of work, we like to call them our wisdom keepers. So I'm so honored to introduce Lori and Suzanne, who will spotlight here. And if we can give them all a virtual round of applause as they grace our screen.
Good morning. So Suzanne has to unmute.
Good morning, everyone. Or should we say good afternoon?
Good afternoon. Yeah. So I think we'll start with introduction, Suzanne, of ourselves.
Okay. Bonjour, Nansen, District Magazine Dotum. I said hello. My name is Suzanne Nash. My spirit name is Nance, which means the brown bird that survives the winter. I'm from Bois Forte, and my clan is the Migizi clan. And my English name is Suzanne Nash.
Oki Nethaniko Aste ki Amspakaniaki ki Sitsuketa Piaki. My name is Lori Newbreast. I'm coming to you from, actually, I feel very privileged. I am coming to you from my ancestral homelands in what is now known as the state of Montana from the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. But I'm also a member of the Sitsiketapi Confederacy, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. And our traditional territory extends up into what is now Canada. So I think that's, for me, that's where how I arrived here today is through my parents. I live on a river where very early in their lives, they met each other. So literally, I can go outside and the first person I will see is one of my relatives. So I feel very privileged today to be home and I have my little tobacco tie that it's not, well, it's kind of little, that was gifted to me. And I think today, both Suzanne and I are galactic storytellers. So I just put some questions more for the participants to be thinking about, but really how we will share our stories on traditional tobacco. Like, how did we arrive here today? How does tobacco connect? What is your relationship with tobacco? And that's really, I think what we want to share is we come from two different, very distinct cultures, and our origins of our relationship with tobacco are, I think that's what's fascinating about the world we live in, that it's dynamic, it's complex, and but today, so thanks to ACAF, the American Indian Cancer Foundation, I thought of, excuse me, I was doing something earlier outside and it's dusty. We've all been, if you are on this webinar or you're watching it in the future, I was like, you know how things exist we're having faith that out there, like in the quantum space, right? That our words have impact to the end of the universe, to the next galaxy. But I was thinking about all those people that have yet to join in relationship with tobacco. But really, for Indigenous people, we all today coming to this webinar, you have a relationship with tobacco. And we all know, like tomorrow's World No Tobacco Day. And when I first heard that, I was just like, this just made my heart grip. And I thought, well, that doesn't include me. And so I really want to today share with you traditional tobacco, how I engage in, how I have a relationship, and the people I come from. And so that it's been now, it's been a long time since the public health models on commercial tobacco have entered our space. That's how I want to say it. And we always knew that there were two tobacco ways that we were talking about, Siksikaitapi and other peoples. But we also had the consciousness, like in the paper Coco referenced, the two tobacco ways really came about to, like, we were already in the indigenous cultural healing space. We were already addressing the intergenerational trauma. We were already addressing intergenerational healing and resiliency. Indian country had been, or indigenous country had been really using those terms for many, many years, decades, which is small in the history of humankind. It's a small period of time. So when I came into this, I walked into doing the current tobacco work, or this century, I guess I could call it, this century's work, already a keeper of traditional tobacco, a carrier of traditional tobacco. I upheld for my people the original agreement of our relationship with tobacco, which is you can use the word pistachka. That's our word. And if you have a word for tobacco too, please enter into the chat. I think one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish in this time is not only to acknowledge, Suzanne's, her cultural system of knowledge that she comes from. So we'll be sharing speaking, but also to really encourage people as we share this time together to remain curious. And I just like to always encourage people, remember to breathe, right? That's really like what one of our shared commitments is, to make healthy places where in our worlds where commercial tobacco doesn't enter because of the process it's been through, right? So the breath really is also how I entered this. The way that we talk about life for my people is we talk about the entity that gave us sacred breath. And that's also related to like the world where the tobacco seeds were given to us. I'm privileged to live just an hour and a half from there. I can go to that origin place where we were gifted the tobacco seeds. I can go to places where all the relationships that tobacco help us maintain. I can go out my front door. So I go around in my world. That's one of my guiding. This is like my compass. How I establish relationships with not just humans, but with all the living entities, but also with the intention of how I move forward. So that's my long introduction around tobacco for me. But I'd like to also Suzanne and I go way back, and I was like, I don't know everybody at Boys Fort, but I know a lot of them. so, so I just we're gonna entertain a Q&A at the end, but also I'll turn it over to Suzanne for right now.
Yeah, as Lori was saying, I think my first conference introduction to Lori and Coco was in Washington, D.C. My first trip ever, leaving my children who were small at that time. And we were at this college that was turned into dorms. It was secluded, like out in the middle of nowhere when we got dropped off. And I can remember thinking, being by myself, there was nobody else I went with. And I remember texting my mom and calling her and I said, I made it. And she was like, did you get your tobacco with you? And I'm like, yeah. And I remember calling her because the dorm doors had like a gap in them and that you could see through. And I can't hear it all in my left ear. So that's always made me nervous when I travel by myself. Will I be able to hear something? So um, I put that tobacco down by the door. And I knew if I had that tobacco down by the door that I was going to be safe. And then that was my first introduction to those guys was a Praxis conference when I met Coco and Lori there. And Coco and I shared a little bit about being away from our children, what that felt like. So yeah, so that was my first time I met them. Coco was really young. I think her and I are like maybe 10 years or so apart. So to me, then she was just a baby. So it was really nice to connect with them. And so I made sure to hang out with them the whole time at the conference. Like, where were they? I knew I'd be safe if I was with these Indians, laughing at, taking me in. Yeah, so I just thinking about this and my relationship with tobacco started when I was, a little girl, when my mom was in recovery. And when she was in recovery, I knew that if she had a bad day, I would offer my tobacco or just in general. And so I just remember a particular story where she came home and we knew she was not feeling well or was upset, or so I took my sister by her hand and we ran down the stairs after she came in, and she's like, where are we going? I said, we're going to go pray for mom. And so we went out and found the closest tree, and we lived in the city on a corner apartment building, a duplex, and we didn't have a yard, right? And so we went running out and we found a tree, and then we offered her prayers, and I could hear her yelling, Suzanne, Melissa, yelling for us to come in, because we knew when the street light came on, it was time to come in. And my sister was like pulling on me. She's like, come on, we're gonna get in trouble. We gotta go. I'm like, no, we gotta finish this. Offer our tobacco. We gotta do our prayers. And so we did. And then she heard our little footsteps clicking up the stairs, and we got up to the top of the stairs, and she was like, Suzanne, where were you? You're supposed to be in this house when the street light comes on. And she said, I was yelling for you. And I said, well, we went and put tobacco out because we knew you had a bad day. And I just remember that look on her face. And then she just kind of reached in and grabbed both of us and hugged us tight. And so I think like that, I remember that journey of starting that. And that's kind of been the way the process now is. When I got the first grant, when I started here at IPTF, I wasn't doing tobacco. I was the housing manager for townhouses that we have here at IPTF for people living with HIV and AIDS. And one of our colleagues here, Jennifer, said, hey, we got this new grant, this new project. I think you'd be really good at it. And she told me about it. I'm like, I don't think so. Work with 11 tribes. And there was all this in it. And I was like, no, I passed it up. I said, I'm comfortable here being the housing manager. And she's like, no, that's not where you should be. So she pushed. And then I started with my first Clearway grant. And I worked in that grant to work with 11 tribes as a coalition, Minnesota Native American Council on Tobacco, where we did campaigns on secondhand smoke-free homes. We started that back in 2000 with smoke-free homes on the reservations. And to think now, Minnesota just now has smoke-free homes. So I feel like in Indian community, we were always ahead of the game. Getting there, we just always arrived a little bit later. And so that big campaign messaging went out, and it was great. That was my first role as a tobacco coordinator working with Clearway. And back then it wasn't so easy to work with Clearway. So it took a while for them to get the concept of traditional tobacco and what that meant for our people. And yeah, so I'm happy to be here today to share the dialogue with Lori and Coco about, what does tobacco mean to us? And Lori gave an example, I gave an example of like why we'll never be tobacco free. Commercial tobacco free, we strive for, yes, but we're not in a place to use traditional tobacco all the time because not everybody has access to it. Not everybody's able to grow it. And so it was 1843 that they made it against the law for us to practice our cultural ceremonies, singing, drumming. And a part of that was that traditional tobacco offering. Before you started any of that, you offered that tobacco, whether it was Lakota, Dakota offering Kinshasa or the, where they use the corn pollen in, the states out west. And thinking about that, so from 1843 to 1978, we could not do that practice without having feared that you would go to jail. Not because you were offering that tobacco, but because you couldn't do the ceremony. And so you couldn't do that tobacco without doing the ceremony. So they went hand in hand. And so for growing up, I grew up in the era where you went in hiding and you practiced those ceremonies behind closed doors. You blanketed the windows when we did naming ceremonies. You went far up north to do ceremonies, period, to get away so that people, they wouldn't be worried about, being hauled up to jail. So I think it's a really important time to think about what does that next 500 years look like? And what are we going to do in that next 500 years? And yeah, and so I'll stop right there and see if Lori wants to talk about anything else, but that's, my story with tobacco and how I arrived here today doing this work, reclaiming it.
Thank you, Suzanne. Let's see how I come into right now into the space within this time with all of you that yesterday we had thunder and lightning. Sister Kuminen, the chief over the day. And that is for my people, it sets about like a certain type of protocol in your life, like in our cultural way of being. So part of my journey for myself is I went outside my house and I made an offering to Sister Kuminen because it's a relationship with traditional tobacco that's like I don't think about it. I don't hesitate to do it. And I come from in my family lineage. Two of our people use English word clans, but so I'll use that word is the Black Door and also the Lone Eaters. And so in those two clans, there were responsibilities that I have in my DNA, but also I have in my practices that come from. That's where they come from. They're passed down through the thousands of generations that lived before me in our ancestral way of living on the land in our homelands. And so this time like the summertime, that concept of 4 times, 4 seasons, even that we adapted to, we had to walk through. And sometimes people call when you adapt to changes, they right now resiliency, right? You could even buy a t-shirt, resiliency. So I always like to talk about the land beyond resiliency. It's the land where the space where you regather yourself, where if you were harmed in any way, it's just wide open, right? And or maybe abrupt change has come into your life, or maybe you're at a crossroad. Maybe you had a victory, and now you're like, uh-oh, now what? You're at points of decision or consideration of how you're going to move forward. So for my people, tobacco is central to that. And for people that maybe this is their first tobacco job, because that was a great thing, you almost need fresh blood. That's called next generation. That's called mentorship. Because if you become rigid, I think flexibility is a core practice in exhibiting your strengths that people see outwardly as resiliency. So tobacco supports that. That's one of the original agreements for my people, that tobacco came to us already holy, already sacred, already with a place in the universe. And it agreed to help us, which is real different. It's like it was a relationship of two beings meeting. And really, that is how we see the world. Like one of the elders, Reggie Croshoe, that were the Confederacy is still gifted to have him in our living and breathing and traveling around. He told me that, the way that, like, we see everything as like our relative. So if you hear some people say all my relations, or you come into the Indian space and you're like, what? All my relations. We really mean that. But there's a practice of living that, and that involves, for my people, our core practices, our culture prior to America, prior to anybody coming over here, relies on that tobacco helping us negotiate to cause no further harm and to uphold primary original cultural collective agreements that my ancestors made. So that's like the system, the cultural system of knowledge that I come from. Suzanne was talking about, the drum. So the system of knowledge, like if we take any of it to be embraced and be supported to carry those responsibilities of like a song or the drum or tobacco, there's a whole system, a cultural system that someone travels through. And so in the modern time, or, in the recent times, we are on a journey as Indigenous people. I think worldwide, you can see this, where we are repairing and restoring, but also we're revealing. It's like, I don't have like a superhero emblem on my, beneath my jacket, but that's the time we're in. So when the enthusiasm and passion of the public health, like mainstream or general population, however you want to say it, came into our world at a time when we're, reconnecting generations and maintaining cultural systems of knowledge so that future generations can be their authentic self. That's basically, like I would say our cultural goal. Be happy, have all your dreams come true, and be authentic. So negotiating this to where now you can hear, and prior to, to some of the web changes, and there was a time before the internet, just for the young people, there was a time before the internet, you could find web pages that would acknowledge in text the two tobacco ways, the ceremonial use of tobacco and the commercial tobacco. But I want to talk about the world of ceremonial tobacco, but also of indigenous healing. Because even though some, to their knowledge of today, indigenous cultures did not include tobacco, we have a practice of forming alliances and relationships and offering mutual aid, tribal nation to each other. And so during the recovery period from, if you want to call the intergenerational systems of harm that came to us over the last 500 years, but like we could just go yesterday, is that we offered mutual aid between cultures. We welcomed them into our way of practice so that we could support their healing. And tobacco is at a core of that. So I want to give a relevant example, like you could take it away and it can be part of the picture that you leave with today. Is 2 years ago in the territory of my people, another confederacy came, the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, the eastern part of that, right? Of another confederacy from the eastern land base. And with my people, the Siskiyik, we formed an alliance to make sure that the division that the geopolitical border had brought to our people, which is also part of our healing. It doesn't, that's a whole other thing. We call it the medicine line. That's how we interpret it in English. And, but we came together, two confederacies, the Siskiyik and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And we joined in alliance. It's kind of like, you stay you be you, we'll be us, and we'll stay us. But together we're going to join on an effort that is impacting our people. So two different cultures being impacted by the same issue. And the way we are approaching it is we had a ceremony of alliance, and tobacco was central to that. So they were in our territory, but so our ceremony, that's how we joined in alliance with another people. And their practices are unique, and that's their way of life, and we have ours. But tobacco was central to that. And so it comes with a lot of principles and values of understanding the protocols around, some people call them rules, but these are the ways that we were given to maintain life in a good way and for everybody's well-being. And I think sometimes that one of the differences I see in the two tobacco ways is if you do individual behavior focus, you miss this whole richness of community, of family, of intergenerational healing. And when you only use, it's kind of like seeing through your eye like this, you miss this other part. And that other part is filled with, how do you go out and pick or go where the medicine lives, and the medicine to help you, the earth medicines that come from the earth. The protocols around that involve tobacco. In the spring, there's a practice that I was given responsibility for, to care for myself. So if you want to say a life skill, and that involves offering tobacco to the water. So I'm safe because I live in snow country. Well, currently snow country. But those practices predate my lifetime. They predate the establishment of anything I know now. They predate, Amazon. They predate the internet. But that's what traditional tobacco has. There's a whole world of restoration, healing, belonging, interconnectedness, and generosity that comes through those practices. But I wanted to give that example of mutual aid between nations and between cultures. So that's also part of traditional tobacco. Because I could speak as and as an Indigenous woman, that my people we've had a lot of changes, and we have practices to support who we are and our authentic selves. And not that there aren't challenges, but that's also a role of tobacco. But I just wanted to kind of sometimes people talk about us as we're already past tense and we'll be living and breathing in front of them. So those vital ways that brought us here today over the last, I want to say, since our creation, those ways and those practices of traditional tobacco, that's where we came from. And if you're new to tobacco came from this hemisphere, and only that I'm familiar with, 2 other places in the world. But we all have that collective intention to use it so that our well-being, our cultural well-being, and when I say cultural well-being, I mean our relationship with everything includes that well-being. So it's beyond just the individual person. It's looking at culture, the dynamic practices of culture. But that's kind of, so I'd like to hear from Suzanne too.
Yeah, thinking about how the tobacco was always here, right? Like it was always our gift that was given to us from the Creator. And I try to give people a view of that may be non-native, that our gift was tobacco, like churches were given the wafer and the wine. That was their gift, and that's what they used in the churches, and that's what they used in prayer. And then they, if you were Catholic, you had to go through communion, right? And communion means communal. That means in community, to be in community and to be in prayer. And so for us, when you think about tobacco, when we're in prayer and we're making that offering, we are communal at that time. We're in community and we're sharing that. And we're not just offering it for ourselves, we're offering it for all the animals, for the land, for the water, for that first breath that you take. When you come into this world, our breath is sacred. And when we take that first breath when we're born, and that first scream, that first breath, that's that first release of that medicine, right? Is that breath. And we know that when we're born into this world, we come in from that eastern doorway where life begins. That's also where that tobacco plant sits. It sits in that eastern doorway, and that's our medicine. And so we use that for lots of different things. Like we said, for being communal, being in community, offering guidance and gratitude for another tribe, maybe sharing something with us, one of their gifts that they have. And language, language is such another big part of historical history that I don't want to say we lost, because they say that your culture is always inside you. It's living, breathing. It's always there. But when we were forced to assimilate, and when they said, those Indians don't want to act like civilization, they don't want to live civilly, they don't want to do what we're doing, they made it against the law. And with that process, you kind of got into a space of, well, you did get into a space of not practicing that, right? So I think there's so much history around it being colonized for profit and gain for habitual use, and that we have gone through a lot of trauma, a lot of things that need to be unlearned in this process through the years, and thinking about teaching our next generation and the kids that, and that's why I say, what does that look like for the next 500 years? What is that next generation going to be saying? What are those people that become Lori and I move on as that generation? What are they going to say? Not hopefully not the same thing her and I are saying today. Hopefully it's they're able to speak fluently in their language, and they're able to teach their kids. One of our kids in our program yesterday, we did a filming with them about our songs have power. And one of the interviews said, what does that mean? And so I asked the kids, I said, what does that mean? What does that mean to be able to have your culture, to be able to sing the songs, to be able to sing the tobacco song, to be able to sing a song before you plant, to be able to sing a healing song, to be able to sing a song before you send them off in the spirit world? Like those songs are so powerful, and they have such a vibration that sends that out to the creator, and we can't do any of that without tobacco. It's the first thing we do is make that offering. And the kids said, a couple of the kids I thought was really said she gets to be comfortable in her own spirit because she knows who she is. And she said the tobacco helps keep me healthy and grounded, and also helps keep me in community. And I was kind of sitting back, and I was thinking, oh gosh, like imagine being able to say that when I was a little kid, even though I knew the power of that tobacco, right? Even though I knew that practice, we didn't have after school programs that taught us about our culture. We didn't have after school programs that taught us about how to stay above the influence, right? And we didn't have any of that. So these kids have that, and to watch them be able to sing the song, offer the tobacco, was so humbling yesterday. It was like, this is what the next generation is going to do. They're going to lead the way. They're going to be singing the songs. They're going to be, teaching, having cultural, cultural groups, having cultural practices, learning the language. It's such an important piece, and it's such an important piece to teach other people what that means to us and how we use it in community, how we use it for our food, for feasting, for gardening, for giving thanks to that earth and offering that tobacco for the food that it gifted us with today. Lori talked about offering it when the thunder beams come. We offer, that tobacco. We also offer that tobacco before we travel. And so it's so a part of who we are and ingrained, that I feel like it's such a powerful message to continue to send on. And it's comes deeply from your spirit and your heart, that you can feel the change. You can see the stories that will come after this. And we've been gifting out tobacco seeds forever. And we're working on a project right now where we're collecting those stories of the tobacco, where they went doing interviews and asking people, where did you grow your tobacco? How did that go? What's the story behind it? And I think that's also such an important thing. And to be in a place in time, because I think for so long we were afraid to reclaim the tobacco and share the stories because um, it was guarded for safety, right? It was they didn't want anybody else to know because they didn't want it to be taken away. So I think there are, you know, some people that still are not sure about sharing our stories today because of some of the trauma that came along with that process and not being able to do it. Yeah, I just feel like it has so much of it is a gift, and the gift keeps on giving each time we offer that asema, and each time our kids get to be in circle and be able to do that and offer that. It has made uh, tremendous changes in these youth lives that I've worked with in the last 20 years. I can look back from the first time I did group to now, we're so much farther ahead. There's so much more. These kids are out doing openings for conferences. They're doing ceremonial practices in DC in front of Altera. They're putting their advocacy skills to work. And they're happy about it because they get to do the work. They get to do the work that we've been teaching them and to offer their SEMA. A group of our kids just went out and learned how to do with Matt Pendleton and Lower Sioux, how to do the Kinshasa. And they're like, that's a lot of work, taking care of that medicine. And we still have some that they still got to do. So it's in the freezer because we can finish it all. And that was the process. It's like, to take care of it is to put it in the freezer until we can come back to it. And always to not take more than you need. Right now we have over almost 2,600 tobacco plants growing at our farm today, traditional tobacco plants that we'll be able to gift out. So yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a transition, Lori, like how do you feel like what do you think like since we started this work? Do you and 20 years ago, do you feel like we're in a better space and a better place in time?
Well, since I'm at home in my homeland, I feel pretty good. So I think the space is pretty good. but I want to like thank you, Suzanne. So once you said I could see all these tobacco plants. So that's one way traditional tobacco comes to people, is the intentional planting. But there's also many, many people that kind of like if you're new to Indian country or you're unfamiliar, like all you'd have to do is Google hashtag land back. So part of the land back philosophy, or like acknowledging what homeland you now live in of indigenous people. It was somebody's home. It is somebody's home. Is access to where the tobacco lives. So there are many cultures that go out and meet tobacco where it lives. They go out and gather. So their system of traditional tobacco access is still being restored. And in their generations, rather than having to go and fear, arresting or being arrested, that access to where the medicine lives is so important. And where I live along the Canadian border, the imaginary Canadian border, just over the mountains is up into British Columbia and Canada. They Englishize the name from the Kootenai people, but that is called Tobacco Plains. That whole mountain valley coulee river system. And so for some of those cultures, they went out to the land to meet tobacco. So it's away from like what a lot of people are familiar with, like, and it's not the agricultural model, but the indigenous like planting. So their land and their homeland, and that's for my people too. It was specific for how we uh, ceremonially planted tobacco, ceremonially carried the seeds, and then there was a process where the land and all the beings that had gifted us that tobacco cared for it, and then we returned when it was what people call a harvest, but when it was ready to be held by us. And so our ceremonial planting involves, it's not that, somebody has a fertilizer or a watering schedule. There's a whole part where we trust the earth. We trust all the other sacred beings to help us grow the tobacco. And then we come back. So that means land access for us. And there's an example that I live next to Glacier National Park. And so we, Sitkay Tapi, have restored our access to our medicine. So it's just us. And I think that kind of, it kind of like can be a glimmer of understanding why World No Tobacco Day, caused me to go, like, kind of like, it's like a jolt. Some people call it a trigger, but I don't like, a trigger has other meaning. It could be a horse on a television show, or it could be a trigger on a gun. So I like to say like a jolt. So in restoring where we go and meet where the medicine lives, the earth medicines, as we put down our tobacco to gather it, that's part of our relationship. We had to negotiate and educate many, many, many people, and so that they didn't prohibit us from our practices. And I would want to say, like, one of the things that was always fascinating to me is, there's a legal name, right? Everybody has a legal name. Like, I got so much forms of identity, like it's just beyond right now, constantly having to prove you are who you are. So in the statutory world of that we live in right now, that's the legal name, tobacco. But it has its origins in tobacco. Many of the Tiano people who are still alive, they will tell you that's our word, or some people will say the Arawak, but the Tiano people say that's our word, tobacco. And Pistakan, Asema, it was necessary through the historical process, not by us. It wasn't necessary. It was harmful to us, but it was necessary to illegitimize those words, because the legitimate word is the legal name, tobacco. And I think that that's a core teaching. If you look at you wouldn't have a World No Tobacco Day or any of the other things that have come in the last 25 years if it wasn't for the colonization and the cultural appropriation of a sacred medicine to remove it from its original intention and the cultural systems that hold it sacred. So there are actually, like, pinpoints if you're looking for the division, the two, but it's more than two, because in the indigenous world, it's complex. It's a matrix of cultures. It's the interdependence of why we had our own names for the stars, where we had our own names for plants. And you'll always see that mirrored somewhere, the scientific name, and then, And so a whole bunch of forms, even like I'm trying to think of like a real world example where people could go look. So in the California Conservation Seed Index, if you Google um, Nishonia or tobacco, they bridge many, many plants under one term in parentheses. Indian tobacco, coyote tobacco. And within there is a whole diversity of tobacco plants. So at Contact, since we're working on the 500-year plan now, um, there was a system where we could say that there are over 67 now species that exist in the Americas. But the way they're displayed is Indian tobacco, coyote tobacco, and then they'll say, so I think that that whole complexity of how you could have us have to say our world will never be tobacco free, because it wasn't. I mean, that's a fact. Our world was not tobacco free, but we didn't have the harm that has come with commercial tobacco. And we're in a transition. So back to like the opening, and I know I was looking for the Q&A, Coco, but I know there might be some questions in the remaining minutes. But so remain flexible, remain curious, remember to breathe if this is like new to you. But I know what we all have in common is that we have all been impacted by tobacco. But the way, the relationships that you have with it, your purpose and your intent, those matter. And so I hope in the 500-year plan, it is not, there is no end game in the indigenous world for indigenous tobacco and our practices and our cultural ways of being. But I know I didn't see that Q&A, so I hope if there's a question in the chat or if Coco wants to come back on and
Yes, yes. Well, thank you both, Suzanne and Lori. Your wisdom, and like I said, we can listen for hours. And right now, if there are any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. This is why we're doing it. It is a living, breathing thing. We really want people to understand and shift the narrative of World No Tobacco Day to honoring these very alive traditions. And you just heard, from two people, and there's so many people in the communities who practice in ways. And so upholding those traditions and uplifting all of the indigenous voices. So as you guys are going out and doing this work, like both Lori and Suzanne said, to honor the medicines, to ask your relatives, your coworkers, neighbors. There's so many ways to connect with the communities on the lands that you are on, and learning about those traditions and what that means for the communities. So as you guys are moving forward, think about Keep Tobacco Sacred Day. We do have websites, traditionaltobacco.org, American Indian Cancer Foundation, Indigenous Peoples Task Force. We do have a lot of great resources to share and connect during this time. So if there's questions and comments, I love that question, Lori. What is our next 500 years? And like Suzanne was saying, right? Like the kids are doing that and taking over. Ivy had asked, are there any resources for children to understand coloring sheets and native produced art? Yes, if you go to right now www.traditionaltobacco.org, we actually have some coloring sheets done by Indigenous artists of what tobacco means to them. So please go check it out in the resources section. And then, we always like to have fun. So if you were on here, Mac is going to share his screen. We like to do door prizes. So if you guys are thinking about more questions, please do that. So Mac, please share your screen. He's been taking everybody's name, and we'll send you a little care package. If you all want to stay connected, just shoot us an email. We have a lot of cool upcoming events. We have, Healing Together Conference that's happening in Colorado. We'll have the National Tribal Tobacco Conference, webinars throughout that will really highlight what Lori and Suzanne have been talking about and hearing about other incredible stories from across the country. Some of you on this webinar can share stories. So I'm going to turn it over to Mac as he does. We're going to draw two prizes. And if you are one of the winners, send me your information in the chat and we'll get that mailed out to you. So while Mac, if you want to do the first spin, I do want to give a huge shout out to our team, Aida, Melissa, Jenna, who's on the webinar, Mac, for helping. We really did this in a fast and furious from creating the logo that you guys, I will put in the chat. So if you guys want to use this and share this tomorrow in your group, we would love to have you do that. So Mac, take it away. I don't know if you guys can hear the sound. That's my favorite part of the wheel. All right, it looks like the first winner is Nicole T. So if you can send me your information, we'll get you a little care package out. All right, one more. Oh, it's a close one. Who's it gonna? Anna Marie, congratulations. Thank you so much. So please send me your contact. And before we close, again, a huge thank you so much, Lori and Suzanne, for your infinite wisdom, your stories. It's just really been an incredible journey. And as we always say, tobacco keeps us connected and the circle continues to grow. So thank you all so much for being here. We are recording this, so we'll be able to share if you guys have any questions or just want to rewatch and hear these beautiful stories. So, wishing you all a beautiful day. Keep tobacco sacred. And until next time, take care.
Coco, if you could share our website, that would be great.
Your
web-
Indigenous Peoples Task Force? Yes.
Everybody have a good day.
Right. Nicole, I got your name, but I didn't get the address, so you might be sending that. I just want to make sure I get that. Awesome. Thank you. All right, we'll close the webinar now and we'll see you all again soon. All right. Bye.